Wisconsin Clean Cities is pleased to participate in the webinar series in partnership with South Shore Clean Cities. These webinars will focus on a variety of sustainable transportation topics in an effort to provide key information to our members and stakeholders. All webinars will be pre-recorded and released to allow viewers to watch and learn at their convenience. Today, we proudly present the webinar, What You Didn't Know About Biofuels. Unlike other renewable energy sources, biomass can be converted directly into liquid fuels called biofuels to help meet transportation fuel needs. The two most common types of biofuels in use today are ethanol and biodiesel, both of which represent the first generation of biofuel technology. Joining us today to offer insight on biofuels is Elena Jetty of the Indiana Soybean Alliance and Indiana Corn Marketing Council, along with John Hunter of American Lung Association. Wisconsin Clean Cities is thrilled to welcome both of our presenters. First up is Elena. Elena works with a variety of stakeholders from Indiana corn and soybean farmers, ethanol producers, fuel retailers, various fuel associations, environment and sustainability organizations, automakers, and racing communities within the ethanol and biodiesel space in efforts to continue driving market development and innovative pathways forward. The Indiana Corn Marketing Council, ICMC, is Indiana corn farmers' marketing arm, and so much more. It's a statewide organization that serves Indiana corn farmers through checkoff programs that help create demand and broaden markets, opening opportunities down the road and across the globe for Indiana corn farmers. ICMC puts the Indiana Corn Checkoff to work with checkoff investments to further education, promotion, and research opportunities to expand market access. The Indiana Soybean Alliance, ISA, recognized by the Secretary of U.S. Department of Agriculture as a qualified state soybean board, is a statewide organization that serves Indiana soybean farmers through checkoff, membership, and policy programs. ISA works with two national soybean organizations, United Soybean Board and American Soybean Association, to meet demand, develop new uses for soy products, expand export markets, and develop national policy. Take it away, Elena.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate the invite to be on this webinar. Thank you so much. Well, today I know the topic is what you didn't know about biofuels. And so I just wanted to first kind of give a little bit of background of just kind of where biodiesel and soybeans stand for Indiana. And then the majority of my presentation will focus ethanol in Indiana, just because we do wear both hats, I say, in the state. Instead of trying to toggle back and forth, I thought I would focus this webinar primarily on ethanol, but wanted to make sure I touched on biodiesel. So just wanted to let the folks and the viewers know that Indiana is the fourth largest soybean producing state, growing more than 330 million bushels annually. Soybean-based biodiesel is a major agriculture product in Indiana and can grow significantly if we had more certainty in the market. Indiana produces more than 100 million gallons of biodiesel per year. The soybean oil from more than 62 million bushels of Hoosier soybeans is produced into biodiesel, and that represents roughly about 24% of all soybean harvested in Indiana annually. Biodiesel is an earth-friendly biofuel that cuts emissions by an average of 85%. I'll let my partner here today, John, speak more of the air quality portions to that. And then I'll probably go ahead and just jump in here to the ethanol section. So something that a lot of folks don't know, and again, speaking on behalf of for Indiana's, our state, ethanol accounts for the use of about 47% of Indiana's corn crop, and over a third of the entire U.S. corn production. So Indiana represents about 7.5% of the U.S. ethanol industry, making it the fifth largest ethanol producing state. So that's some of the fun facts that I like to kind of start out with. Just to go ahead and dive into some of the program specific focus areas that I actually do for Indiana and helping assisting, I say my clients, which are our Indiana corn farmers, is one of our program areas is just ethanol production and its expansion. We've got 14 going on a 15th ethanol plant that's in production right now. And so keeping this geared towards more the checkoff side and not really the policy side. Sometimes that policy world can impact and other worldly issues that happen as we are facing kind of this pandemic that we're going through right now, the ethanol production side. And so supporting our ethanol producers is a key component in my role here in Indiana. We also work on new engine development for higher blends of ethanol and also the infrastructure to the equipment, the piping, the underground storage tanks, and working with a lot of our the fuel retailers that are serving higher blends of ethanol at their gas stations. Another area is our stakeholder engagement. So working with those fuel retailers on education and promoting those higher blends of ethanol at their locations. Try to get an updated economic impact study every 2 to 3 years, so that way we can see sort of the trends in industry, things that are happening to keep our corn farmers in our state and our different stakeholders that we work with here in Indiana informed on the ethanol and the impacts to Indiana. And so to kind of keep it simple, just farmer to ethanol plant, our producers to the fuel, that's the terminals and the racks where the fuel retailers get their fuel to send to their stations, which then ultimately ends up in the consumer's vehicle. And working with that automaker piece are the various supply chains that I'm having to work with on a daily basis. Just a couple of things on that economic impact on what maybe you didn't know with the biofuels piece is that here in Indiana, we produce over about 1.2 billion gallons annually. I mentioned earlier that it's about 7% of the total U.S. annual production. Some of the direct impacts of ethanol production that creates about 592 full-time equivalent jobs, 63 million in labor income, and 2.1 billion in sales. So the total economic impact to Indiana's ethanol production is supporting over 2,861 full-time equivalent jobs, 279 million in labor income, and 2.5 billion in sales. So that's a lot that is going towards Indiana's economy. Couple of things here. So I work with the infrastructure expansion programs here in Indiana. So we do offer, and we have some programs that assist with some potential grant funding that we can assist our fuel retail partners with, new ones and existing ones that are looking to offer higher blends of ethanol at their location, their retail location. ICMC has assisted with over 80 locations to offer E85 FlexiFuel, and most recently with this RVP waiver to offer unleaded 88, which we call it, also known as E15, in the market. So we partner with here in the state with a variety of different fuel retailers such as Casey's General Store, Thornton's, Family Express, just to name a few. And ultimately, the unleaded 88 offerings is now, to my knowledge, over 1,800 locations across about 31 states. So we try to make sure we keep that information up to date with some of our farmer leaders and our consumers and various stakeholders. So unleaded 88 E15, just a background, it's a blend of 15% ethanol and 85% gasoline. It burns cleaner, has higher octane, that's better for your engine, environment, and ultimately the consumer's wallet. It's approved for all cars 2001 and newer, and Americans have already logged more than 10 billion miles on it. Up to 10 cents per gallon less than regular 88 in some markets that I've seen. So on the infrastructure piece, we've come through a lot of different hurdles. And so when I'm working with the fuel retailers in Indiana, I have to remind folks that at the end of the day, they are running a business. And we're fortunate to be one of those ingredients that are in 10% per gallon of fuel currently right in the majority of all gas stations. So having the opportunity to sell that extra 5%, unleaded 88, E15, has been a huge positive step for the industry, in my opinion. So just trying to overcome some of those hurdles of just selling it year round, the branding piece of what to call it, has been something that a lot of folks have tested with just various different brands. And so calling it E15 has not been obviously tested too well with the consumer. So unleaded 88, regular 88 is what I've seen has been successful for many of the fuel retailers. So making sure that I am assisting with encouraging the way that they're branding it to the consumer to help ultimately drive consumers to their station to then go inside the store to purchase whatever the food and beverage offerings that they like, because typically the majority of the C-store or the convenience store's sales and their margins are made on the inside sales versus everything that's happening at the pump. So making sure they have that competitive advantage is definitely a must. So some of the things that, we've had to also overcome in these hurdles is making sure, obviously we can produce ethanol, making sure we've got the retailers who are looking to offer the blends that are, higher than 10%. And then having that branding really ties all that together to the consumer to then look to fill up with that, and making sure obviously the engine component is there to accept this type of fuel, and then the consumer having peace of mind through the entire process. So having to overcome that customer perception is still, I would say, a little bit of a hurdle. And so I try to encourage those who, use, whether it's Gas Buddy or there's an UNL88.com website that you can show to find where you are in your state and see where that fuel is offered close by. I try to make sure I'm giving those tools and resources to folks I come in contact with when I'm talking about the fuel of unleaded 88 or E85 flex fuel. So that about covers, I know it seems like so much, my area of work in this category. So thank you for this opportunity, and I'll let Kelly, you take it over to turn over to John.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and for offering your insight on biofuels. We really appreciate that. Next up, we have John Hunter. John is a senior director in the Clean Air program at the American Lung Association. He has worked on clean fuel and vehicle technology issues since beginning with the Lung Association in 2010. His experience includes ethanol infrastructure development, vehicle development, managing alternative fuel funding assistance programs, and providing technical assistance to fuel retailers and vehicle fleets. Go ahead, John, whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you as well for the opportunity to kind of be a part of this too. It's much appreciated. We always like working with South Shore Clean Cities and Wisconsin Clean Cities. As a host of the Twin Cities Clean Cities in Minnesota, it's always good to do the multi-state collaboration. And I think there are some good examples from this side of the border that can kind of carry through as well. Let me see. So as mentioned, I think one of the first kind of questions we often kind of get is why the Lung Association is sort of engaged in these kind of issues. And it really does kind of fit well into our mission to save lives by preventing lung health, or preventing lung disease and improving lung health. And it really complements the Clean Cities Coalition mission as well, which is all about petroleum displacement and energy independence. So all of these issues kind of work well together when you factor in the fact that tailpipe emissions are really the largest source of traditional air pollutants in the upper Midwest. So we've been working on this for about 20 years at the Lung Association, and ethanol is really where we got started into the realm of working on transportation fuels, and it's been a good program for us for quite a while. So I'm going to dig in first on air quality issues, and then talk a little bit about some of our other work around this and why we kind of do what it is and what we've been seeing here in Minnesota. Little bit of background on me. I actually grew up in the Denver metro area, which for better or worse sometimes is known for the fact that it kind of has a brown cloud that hangs over it a good time, much of my life actually growing up there. Geography, it certainly plays a factor there, but it just happens to have a setup where the smog that coming off of vehicles and other sources really has a way of kind of sticking in there. And that's actually not too dissimilar where geography plays an issue, I think, with both Indiana and Wisconsin, in that really where we see ozone issues looks to be kind of around the lake, sort of around Chicago, Milwaukee, and areas like that, but really kind of hanging out tight to the shores. And I don't think that's sort of coincidental for a combination of both people and geography coming into play. So big picture wise, I guess it's just safe to say air pollution is bad for you. I don't think anybody really disputes that, obviously, but it really does have the ability to kind of infiltrate the body and sort of affect throughout. Obviously, with working with the Lung Association, to focus a lot on the respiratory effects, but when air pollution kind of gets into the bloodstream, and it really carries throughout the body and causes problems kind of throughout the whole system. So I'll talk a little bit about a couple of particular pollutants, but just kind of know that really that sort of carries through for a wide variety of issues with people. And really, the more the science improves, the more impact we're finding from air pollution, and even lower and lower levels of air pollution than we previously knew, which is part of the reason things like the ozone standard under the EPA kind of keep getting tighter and tighter as the science progresses. So I use the term ozone a lot. It's what people often sometimes will refer to as sort of ground level smog or ozone smog. It really is not something that is directly emitted from anywhere. It's air pollutant that is formed by the combination of a few other air pollutants mixing together, usually on hot sunny days. You kind of need some temperature and you need some sunlight. So that's why we typically see ozone issues in summer times. I think one of the simplest way a lot of people kind of visualize this is if you're being exposed to higher levels of ozone, you get kind of, or people liken it to sort of a sunburn on the lungs. You can kind of picture that sort of inflammation and redness and swelling, things like that, that sort of irritating the lungs. And that's obviously bad for all of us, but for people who have pre-existing health conditions or respiratory issues like asthma or COPD, where the airways are already kind of constricted, you can imagine something like ozone irritating that further. It can easily cause or sort of trigger asthma attacks, trigger other respiratory problems, and either put people in hospitals or keep kids out of schools, things like that, that really have ramifications not only directly for health, but a number of other sort of issues that kind of follow that, with hospital bills and missed school days and parents missing work, all that kind of stuff. The other kind of big pollutant that we talk a lot about is particulate matter, particularly what gets referred to as fine particulate matter. So particulate matter comes in multiple sizes. I think what a lot of people picture as kind of tailpipe exhaust and, big black plumes coming out of smoky tailpipes, that really is kind of the larger end of particulate matter issues, what people refer to as PM10 because of it's a 10 micron in size. So we're still talking, 6-7 times smaller than a human hair, but big enough that you can kind of you can see it to some degree when it's kind of being emitted into the air. There's another category of particulate matter called fine particulate, which is, another 4 times smaller than that. This is really kind of tiny stuff that is more invisible to the eye, but really does a lot of health damage. It more easily kind of gets into the lung system. Some of it can sort of lodge into the lungs where it can cause lung cancer. It can trigger a number of similar health problems as ozone pollution does. And some of the air pollutant in the particulate matter category is small enough that it actually passes into the bloodstream through the lung lining walls. And really, once it's into the bloodstream, it gets carried throughout the body. And so you have heart problems, and you see a lot of cardiovascular disease issues and triggered heart attacks, things like that, related to particulate matter. But this is also one of the pathways that air pollution really causes those health problems throughout the body. and in particular, I'll mention too that there are a number of chemicals that can kind of hitch rides on top of the particulate matter. So it doesn't just come as a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. It can come in sort of liquid forms, solid forms, but it also can kind of come coated with various chemicals, particularly some of the chemicals you find in gasoline or finding coming out of tailpipes when fuels are burning. So we also, let me see, I need to mention as well that, all of these fuels and biofuels have a lot of benefits in cutting down greenhouse gas emissions, but I don't think a lot of people really appreciate that climate change is a big health threat too. It's leading to a number of health issues in a variety of different kind of categories in public health. One, you can imagine, as mentioned, ozone forms kind of on the hot summer days. So when we're having hotter days and sunnier days, hotter days, it's easier for ozone pollution to form, particularly when there are other kind of chemicals being emitted in that process. Some of the absolute worst air quality we've had in the upper Midwest in recent years has been a result of drought-induced wildfires, sometimes traveling hundreds and thousands of miles away from the source of the fire, but that smoke can kind of get into the atmosphere, and when conditions set up right, it kind of comes back down to breathing level and creates some absolutely horrible air quality conditions for us. We're also seeing a sort of change in seasons. The upper Midwest is really kind of one of the big areas for this to be seen, where our winters in particular are getting sort of warmer. And we're seeing a lot longer growing seasons for things like ragweed, which is kind of the biggest allergy troublemaker out in our region, at least. And in Minnesota, the ragweed season has gotten 3 weeks longer. So that's having an effect on, particularly with people with stronger allergy reactions or people with asthma and other issues that can really sort of affect. And it turns out in higher carbon dioxide levels that the pollen is also more potent in triggering some of those allergic reactions, so it can be bad. We're also seeing changes in seasons related to mosquitoes and ticks and other little critters that can carry disease with them. So that is creating a whole new set of health issues, or spreading health issues to areas that were not previously affected. So all of this kind of plays into all the more reasons we need cleaner fuels. We have been working on ethanol issues related because of all of these reasons. For 20 years, as mentioned, we started with E85 and really trying to help build out infrastructure in Minnesota and sort of experiment with, how do you start getting cleaner fuel options available. We went to it, because of its tailpipe emission benefits. It reduces a number of pollutants, both E15 and E85. When you're using those fuels, you're kind of displacing dirtier other chemicals that are inside the gasoline. So you're getting a lot of benefits with reductions in benzene and some of the other octane boosters, as well as having a lot of the life cycle greenhouse gas benefits. So I mentioned we started with E85 because that's been around longer. You get some of these same kind of benefits of diluting pollution and little bits of greenhouse gas benefits from E15 as well. It just happens to be, obviously a smaller portion of the mix, so that reduces some of the effects that it has, but nonetheless, you get some of that cleaner emission kind of benefits carrying through there as well. I don't have a slide on it, but I will also mention, I think a lot of people do know that Minnesota has a biodiesel requirement around. So we use a 20% biodiesel blend for half the year. And then when things get cooler, season-wise, we go to a 5% biodiesel blend. That's been particularly helpful for reducing particulate emissions from older diesel vehicles. It's a great benefit in that realm. We also see a lot of greenhouse gas related benefits from using biodiesel as well. All right. So I thought people might be interested in, well, as seen just a little bit of information. We did some opinion polling about a year ago, just to kind of find out, what people were thinking about ethanol fuels, make sure that sort of our perceptions of where we thought people were are matches, I guess, where drivers are and that kind of stuff. So I just want to share a couple of slides. You can somewhat ignore the fact that we sort of tested both people who are driving, well, I'll just say the broad public opinion on it, kind of shown in blue on these charts. We also did some sampling of people driving flex fuel vehicles to just kind of see how that relates to E85. By and large, there's not a giant amount of difference, other than people who have flex fuel vehicles, I think show themselves to be a little bit more familiar with ethanol fuels, and tend to be all that much more supportive. So that kind of carries through. One of the big takeaways I found with the polling that we did really is that overall people have very positive opinions of ethanol, or really are pretty neutral on it. The number of people who have negative opinions on ethanol is really pretty small. And so I think those of us in a certain generation anyway, we kind of remember various fights and things like that over ethanol many years ago. We still sort of battle a lot of the same myths and things like that get carried around. But to me, what this kind of slide sort of demonstrates is that really is a sort of small number of people, I think, that tend to hang on to some really old and kind of outdated information. But by and large, people really feel good about ethanol. The biggest reason by far why people like ethanol is just because it's better for the environment. And so people really kind of see that it carries through, and that it's great to see reflected that people do really seem to get it. The one I thought I would touch on is the fact that a lot of people still just are not familiar with unleaded 88 E15 gasoline. It's getting more and more widespread, but still you can see 60% of drivers as of a year ago didn't really know that it was available for use in their vehicles. That being despite the fact that we're in Minnesota up to about 350 or so retail locations that are offering it, mostly labeled as unleaded 88, and it sells well at those stations. But more and more people obviously still need to get the message that it's available to them and works well in their car. So that is all I have prepared. With that, so I'm happy to turn it back over to Kelly and go from there.
Yeah, thank you, John. So that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you to both of our presenters for sharing some of your experiences working with biofuels with us. And please feel free to contact either the presenters, Elena, John, Wisconsin Clean Cities, or South Shore Clean Cities with any questions regarding today's webinar, and their contact information is up on the slide. And with that, thank you for listening and have a great rest of the day.